Hi there, I'm Laurence Mollerup, and today I'm going to be talking with a Portland bass player, Damian Erskine. Hi, Damian.
Hi, Lawrence.
You're the first person I'm expanding my project here of Vancouver bass players to include people from the Pacific Northwest, and so I'm really happy that you're willing to do a quick interview with me today.
Oh, man. Always happy to hang with you, man.
Yeah, it's great to see you again.
Likewise.
Do you have something you want to teach bass players this morning?
Yeah, I thought I'd hip you to a fun little exercise that is something that's, once you understand it conceptually, you can kind of take and run with it for quite a while. So, in a nutshell, if we take a measure of 4/4 and divide, I was thinking of the chromatic scale. There's 12 notes in the chromatic scale. So I started thinking, okay, here's a measure of 4/4. If we have eighth note triplets, we get 12 rhythms within that measure of 4/4. If we assign every note of the chromatic scale one of those rhythms, say if we start on C, we get 3, 4. We get the chromatic scale through 4 beats and 12 rhythms. So the game of this is to pick a scale. So I'll just start with C major. And if we assign every one of those rhythms a note from the chromatic scale, this is easy to see if we write it out on paper, 12 rhythms, 12 notes, and we pick a scale, say the major scale. If the note's in the scale, we play that rhythm. If it's not, it becomes a rest. So when you do that, every scale has a different rhythm, which I wound up having a lot of fun with, and taking all of my modes and experimenting with the sound of every mode. Major scale, for example, if here's the 1, 2, 3, 4. So I thought that was a fun little idea that I was able to kind of take and run with quite a bit. Let me let me see if you can work out the minor scale for me.
I was just thinking that minor would be like pure natural minor would be a good choice to experiment. So I'm really on the spot now. Can you hear bass okay?
Yep, it's a little quiet. You could be up, but
I'll
it's
crank it a
audible.
little on the preamp here.
Yeah, just a hair.
So if we're starting with chromatic, and that'd be the
Okay.
one, right?
Yeah,
So I'm gonna have to go a little slower to do this really well. Uh,
as slow as you need to. That's the key.
awesome. So something like oh, okay. So after the six, right? There's
Yeah.
two in a row. It would be easier written out. This is cool. So let me try it again. So almost.
Yeah, no, that was it. The only thing is, there's no root at the top, so after the seventh, it drops back down. If you're repeating that scale,
Oh no, that would be
that was
a quarter,
Dorian.
right?
Yeah,
But yeah, right.
yeah. So or Dorian. And what I thought was so fun about this was that I realized a lot of these patterns, when you sped them up, to me sounded like Afro-Cuban bell patterns.
Exactly what I heard as well. I was thinking of that, that pattern.
Yeah, like Cascador pattern. Yeah, it's the major scale pattern.
Wow, there's some kind of logic there that I really like. There's a
Yeah,
hidden
there's
code.
a thread somewhere. I haven't been able to figure out exactly where it is. And what's extra fun, if you want to crank the difficulty knob one more notch, is once you get comfortable with the concept, we've only been working within the construct of eighth note triplets and a measure of 4/4. You can apply this to 16th notes where it turns around every 3 beats, and in a bar of 4/4 that means the pattern is going to be a kind of a hemiola type thing. It's going to be going over the bar line. and you can really kind of take it and expand it. And to me, the idea just kind of personified how when you get creative with your approach to practice and taking the information that you know and really trying to explore it and have fun with it, how much mileage you can get out of this stuff, and you can really come up with some interesting ideas and new ways of perceiving old information.
Yeah, so taking those bedrock principles like 12/8 or 16th notes, and then applying scales and modes to that. It's mix and match, right? So that's a great creative strategy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and and of course, if you take things like the pentatonic scale, which has fewer notes, it means it'll have more rests. And so the rhythms, it's a whole new area of rhythmic study.
And I think maybe this would be a way for someone to come up with their own vocabulary as well. If you took that and really went to town with it and wrote it out, you could write another like Yusuf Latif patterns book or something like that with those combining combining combinations.
Yeah, I had one student. We used to have a lot of fun with this. We would pick one to start. Say, okay, C major, and I would start playing a bass line using the rhythm of C major, and he would try and improvise in C major. And then spontaneously, one of us would call out a new root and a new scale, and we'd try and switch roles and see how quickly we could lock into the appropriate rhythm and the appropriate tonality, and just kind of keep going back and forth. It's an interesting exercise, and it stretches you in different ways, and trying to think of those rhythms without seeing them written out, just kind of envisioning the rhythmic pattern as it
Well,
applies to the scalar pattern.
yeah, I think it almost is like one of those rhythmic cells that you almost kind of feel rather than, when I play it, I don't try to sort of see the rhythm written out, but I kind of feel the rhythm, just like you feel the bell pattern when you're playing Afro-Cuban music, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious. Here's a question: Have you ever done a composition using that technique? Has any of your own music used this kind of idea?
Ah, that's interesting. Actually, no. Not yet, I'll say. Because you've got me thinking. I've certainly had a lot of tunes which came about through rhythmic explorations like this. Maybe experimenting with where I emphasized space as opposed to where I emphasized notes and rhythm. So trying to take what I understood and flip things around in different ways to see what came out. But not this specifically. No, it's a good idea.
Well, there you go. There's some new tunes coming.
Yeah, I'll give you credit. I'll give you writing credit on the next tune.
Um, so this is leading me to think about your role as an educator, because I know you're famous for Right Hand Drive, and that's any bass player that hasn't checked that out. Actually, I'll put a thing right up there to point out that Damian's website, and I'll put a title as well. But that right hand concept that you wrote out so well for us, it reminds me of like Fred Zimmerman's double bass book, where all the bowing options are figured out, and taking the combinations and using the all the instruments you have in your paw. I think that one and the improvising book are really essential for bass players to have. If you're an electric bass player, you want to be hip to that right hand stuff, especially. So I don't know, maybe we could sort of talk. You could talk a little bit about that. Like, are you teaching lessons online right now as well?
Yeah, I've been certainly been doing more remote lessons lately. Um, and actually, one of my first COVID projects was to build an educational website. So I've been putting a lot of energy into basseducation.com. Is that where I've been kind of just pouring everything I know and everything I have into it. But yeah, I've been uh, hyper aware of the fact that I'm not gigging and not touring. So I've really been focusing on more the educational side of things, which I've always tried to foster
Yeah.
in my life as much as possible, because I've always loved connecting with the bass community, and I've always loved seeing that light bulb go off for somebody when you show them something that connects. So I've always tried to. My thing is always to try and be the teacher I wished I had when I was
Amen to
younger.
that. That is a beautiful sentiment.
and take, especially those things that I learned later in life, and why did nobody show me this 20 years ago? Try and show people that kind of stuff, and make open people's awareness. So much of learning has to do with your perception. I was never one who was able, you could never just hand me a sheet of music full of exercises, and if I spent the week learning it, maybe I could play those things at the end of the week, but the information never internalized. I never really learned much beyond muscle memory. So for me, there was a lot of understanding. It was a combination of learning the fundamentals while also trying to get a bigger picture of how I learned and how I internalized information and what it was all for. My approach is basically to try and give people the tools they need to establish a very strong foundation, because the more solid your foundation, the further you can go, the taller you can build. And the best way to go fast is to go slow and with intention. So just building that solid foundation and continuing to layer up. But then also, aside from that nuts and bolts stuff, because so much of playing the instrument is kind of comes down to muscle memory and math. But when it comes to developing your own voice and having a real relationship with the music and with your instrument, a lot of that is a little more ethereal. So I try and tie some kind of big picture concepts into the nuts and bolts exercises at the same time, and try and give people the tools they need to help them teach themselves in the way that they learn best, because everybody learns differently.
Give people the reason why drives motivation, and starting with the impact of things, and why you want to do it. I think a player like you, there's kind of no question, because you've got the track record as a performer, and you can just play things that are expressive and cool right on the spot. So that's very convincing. But I think, people knowing, well, why am I doing this?
Yeah, well, and the why is what connects you to the information on a deeper level, because you start investing yourself. You care about this thing now.
Yeah.
And so much of what I talk about with a lot of my students is finding that thing that you care about. If you're going to transcribe something, don't just transcribe a Parker solo because somebody said you're supposed to, and agonize over 15 choruses over Ladybird. Find that thing that just like hits you right in the chest, and you think, I love that sound. That's what I want to be able to do. And as soon as you care about the thing that you're working on, you spend infinitely more time, and you're far more invested and far more focused, because you know why essentially why you're working on that thing. You know what you're trying to get out of it. You're not just going through the paces because somebody told you that you're supposed to.
It's interesting, because I think, as a guy who teaches as well, sometimes for me it'll go the other way, and I have to kind of remind people, okay, you did this for a class as a hoop to jump through, but now you have a tool, so go use it. Use that tool in the rest of your musical life. And sometimes transferring those skills across, and going, oh, actually, I need this in my band, or I need this I got a musical theater gig, so I need to know how to do X, Y, Z that I got from this, this assignment at school. And so there's another kind of backwards way maybe of looking at that, at the completion point, of going, okay, what do you know now? And assess your skills and make them walk, make them work in your life,
Yeah, well said.
So I was going to ask you, sorry, I just had a pop-up on my screen. I was just going to ask you, people like to talk about gear. Some bass players don't, but maybe if you want to, I noticed you've got a really pretty cool looking bass there. And I think last time we talked, when you were up here in Vancouver, you were saying you're playing way more 4-string these days than anything, and so that's interesting to see. Is I'm doing the same thing. I'm playing mostly my Fender 5-string all the time, and not so much of these kind of basses.
Yeah, I oscillate back and forth. It generally depends on the gig I'm on, but I've found that I just really enjoy playing bass more on a 4-string.
Yeah.
If I'm on a gig that's a heavy reading gig, where it helps to have more range in one position because I'm reading a lot of passages and I don't want to have to shift around, or a heavy soloing gig, I'm more comfortable soloing on a 6-string, because I didn't even explore that side of my playing until I got a 6-string. So I kind of learned how to solo on a 6-string. But for me, as far as playing bass, I just there's something about the four string that I love. So I've definitely been playing this more, and locally, maybe at least 60% funk and R&B gigs. I tend to play six string on the road because I tend to play a six string on jazz gigs because of the soloing thing, and also my kind of chambered, shoaled six string has such a nice sound in a jazz setting. It's kind of my jazz box.
Yeah, I love that you get this kind of like Jim Hall kind of sound, and I think we talked about like that front pickup thing where
Yeah,
and your voicings and your playing have this like hollow body jazz guitar kind of sound.
I love to hear you say that because that's exactly the conversation that Pete Schold and I had before he built it. Was getting even from lowest note to highest note, but having more of I wanted to hear the wood in the instrument. I used that. I actually said Jim Hall. I said I want it to sound like a jazz box guitar. I wanted, but to be able to do some certain bass things as well, and it's wonderfully versatile.
It's funny too. I was a four-string player till about 1984, so a bunch of the first years of my playing, and what I found, I had a jazz bass. I had the jazz of my dreams, right? 69, 70 jazz bass, and I actually sold it because I couldn't use it on any of my gigs because they all called for the bottom string. And it was a little heartbreaking to have to let go of because I felt so comfortable playing it, and it was like, yeah, I could use the octaver, but a lot of these lines I'm playing are in the gospel choir, it's like fusion music, and it's a lot of slap and it's a lot of low B.
Yeah.
So I let that one go, and I kind of regret some days.
Yeah,
So maybe
you
I'll get
almost
another
always
one.
regret the ones you let go. That's true. And I've been talking to Pete. I think at some point I am going to get a five. I've only ever really had fours or sixes. I have one five-string fretless Zahn, and the only reason I had that is because it was just such an incredible sounding fretless. I didn't care if it had 20 strings or one. I just needed to get that sound, and that's pretty much my recording fretless bass. But I've been thinking about the five thing because there's a certain, and as a builder you likely partially understand why. There's a certain sound I feel like you can't get out of a six string that you can get out of a four string.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
But I feel like a five you can kind of do the four string thing but still have that low B. I don't know if it's a mass thing or what, but I've only been able to get a certain sound out of fours and fives and never out of a six. So I would, on this one I have the D tuner. Whoop, there it is. So I can drop it down to a D if I need to. But yeah, especially on church gigs or certain R&B and neo soul type gigs, it's really tough on a four string. There's so much sub bass. So yeah, a lot of times I have the octaver pedal with just the sub bass turned on.
Yeah, so this is a thing I learned from Mike Young, who plays bass with Mother, and I'd never heard of it before, and I've been playing bass a really long time. And this is a trick he showed me. You play right at the octave. So I'm on my A string playing C. And then if I play right here at the octave, I'm not sure I've got it yet. It's kind of hard to tell without an amp. But this gives you like a sub octave if you play the note exactly an octave higher. And I'm not sure if it's like a false harmonic.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Robert Bubby Lewis,
Yes.
he showed me the same thing, except he never mentioned that it was exactly an octave up.
Yeah.
And I've tried to emulate it for people, and I noticed that I'm so hit and miss with it, and I could never figure out why, and that's why. It's the octave thing. Yeah.
You're getting kind of a harmonic thing in there, right?
There's a little like almost sub-octave overtone or undertone.
Yeah, like, so I love that. I love stuff you can do, tricks you can do just with the bass, And I knew about this one I use all the time, right? The sort of one finger with other fingers muting. I use that on like almost every note I play.
That's the
and it
Rocco
just adds so much low end, right? It's like, yeah, the Rocco thing, totally, Yeah, that idea of tricks you can do just with your hands, and there was one I'd never seen.
It's a never-ending thing, and I love that. And that's one thing I love so much about transcription. When you take it a step further than just figuring out what notes they are and what order to put them in, but when you really try and emulate the sound of the person, you're really forced to explore, like, how do I get that sound? That's where my right-hand drive three-finger technique came from, because the bass I was playing at the time was a graphite neck, and it was too brittle. Just the way it was set up and the pickups and everything, it was way too brittle, and it always drove me nuts. I've always kind of hated that glassy sound,
Yeah.
personally. So I wound up palm muting everything. So I was just like dying to find a thicker, rounder bubble of sound. And so it kind of led me down a whole rabbit hole with regards to right-hand technique and using the thumb. But yeah, it's a wonderful way to explore the instrument, just chasing a sound.
Yeah, for sure. And necessity being the mother of invention as well, and I love having a bright bass that I make sound dark through finger magic, right? I always love that kind of approach to things.
Yeah, a lot of people get lost in the gas thing, the gear acquisition syndrome, always thinking that the sound is going to come from one instrument. And it's true, they all sound different. But I think it's almost good when you're forced to really explore one instrument and pull as much out of that instrument as you can, so you can really diversify your palette. And then when you get on another bass, it's a different thing, and you have a wider palette on that bass as well. But it's important to try and really fully explore how much you can draw from just your hands before you go buying every bass and amp under the sun trying to sound like Yannick or something like that.
Yeah. Well, trying to sound like him is an expensive proposition.
Yeah.
In time as well as in money.
Yeah, we had a funny conversation once. He had never thought of that. We were talking, and he just said, man, it's weird. People email me constantly asking what gear I'm using, and I can't figure out why they care. I said, well, it's because they want to sound like you. And he just kind of shook it. Like, it never had occurred to him that was the avenue you would take in your exploration of somebody's sound, like trying to buy that Federa with that amp that he's using, and this, that, and the other. It was kind of a funny moment. It seemed so obvious to me because I'd spent much of my youth doing that.
Well, yeah, haven't we all? I mean, I'm looking at you, Vancouver bass players and Pacific Northwest bass players, right? We're all, and this keeps the stores in business, and that's all great, and I'm definitely buying more gear in the future. But I feel pretty settled for myself with the stuff I've got. I've got nice stuff, and I'm happy. But yeah, that it's almost like a replacement for the really long path of transcribing, and like you were alluding to there, like playing along with a vocal performance or a saxophone and trying to get those effects out of an instrument where once you start the note, like what do you have? You little vibrato maybe, a little muting, but we can't swell a note unless we have pedals and stuff. Oh, except for one guy. You know who this is, Rich Brown. He has magic. He can swell a note. He can play a note, and it gets louder. I don't know what he's doing.
Rich is a magician, and one of the saddest and most profoundest moments of my life were when Rich was playing in Portland, and I was lucky enough to get to hang out with him, and he came over to the house. He's been one of my favorite bass players of all time for years. And he was over, and he was sitting in my living room. We were going through my amp, and he had his bass. He had that Ken Lawrence, and I was like, I've always attributed his sound to that bass, and I was like, I got to try that bass. And man, I picked up his bass. I didn't sound anything like Rich. I still sounded like me. He picked up my bass. He still sounded exactly like him. I was like, no! I've always thought all I needed was that bass, and I'd be fine.
Somebody's gonna someday sell you can buy gloves that are shaped like that person's hands or something.
Yeah, it was wild. And I was like, oh man. And it was actually, his bass for me was really hard to play. The spacing was wider than I was used to. His strings were really kind of high. And I just I couldn't get a good sound out of it to save my life. And it was just kind of soul crushing for a second. But then it occurred to me, I was like, that just means, okay, it's me. I got to do the work. It's important. It's an evolutionary step once you can stop comparing yourself to your heroes in a negative way.
Yeah.
I would did that for years, thinking, man, I can, never sound like Victor or Richard Bona or Rich Brown. And then at a certain point, I realized, but hey, maybe they can't sound like me either. Like, what do I sound like? What is my sound? And and it shifted the focus, and I started really thinking about what I want to sound like, and I started projecting into the future, 5, 10 years. Like, what kind of player do I want to be? What's my sound? What do I want that to sound like? And forced me to better define what kind of player I was and what I was really going for and what I was working towards.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
no, it's kind of empowering once you've really kind of embraced that and just explored your sound and what you want, and don't worry about the fact that you can't play as fast as this person, or play bebop as well as this person, or whatever it is. Putting the focus more on what it is you actually want to do and what you want to sound like, what kind of player you want to be.
It's funny. I also just thought, like, Rich told me that Alain Caron, the Quebec-based, fusion bass player,
Uh-huh.
was his biggest hero. One of my big heroes coming up too, life changer for me actually. And he said, and it's so funny because he doesn't sound like Alain really at all in his playing,
Right.
but he transcribed all of that stuff, all Uzeb and all that music. He was totally onto it, and it's kind of beautiful, right? He's in a way got as well as important a voice as that for sure.
Yeah, and all of those influences, all of those things that you get into and have been into, they're all in there somewhere.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of Alain in him somewhere, but his individuality is so strong on the instrument. It's like, no, that's just Rich.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was gonna maybe as a sort of final section for today, I was thinking about the question of what people are doing to get through this quarantine time, and I'm kind of hoping this video will be watched by people a year from now or months from now and going, oh yeah, I remember that weird time we all got through.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to share a little bit of tips. Like Kirby Barber and I were talking about baking apple pies, and you know, almost everybody's been talking about fitness and how they're doing yoga at home and all those kind of things. And what focuses, maybe if you have any tips for people watching this, bass players and musicians in general, or just humans.
I think it's interesting. This is the first time, at least in my history, that we've globally been going through a collective experience.
Mhm.
And I think initially there was a real push for everybody to, like, oh man, you got to get your side hustle going, or if you're not crushing on your instrument after this, there's this real drive for everybody to get hyper motivated and really work and get to work. Um, which is kind of the approach that I took, but I quickly realized that it's also important to self-help and self-health, no matter what that means. If you feel overwhelmed and need to take the time to do nothing or just read a book, do it. I've given myself the freedom to not feel guilty if I feel overwhelmed and need a day to just reboot and quiet my mind.
Yeah.
Mostly for me, I was always pretty. I was already pretty well into the health kick after losing all that weight last year. So my main focus has been trying to maintain as many of those habits as I can.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think you like to hike as well. I think I've seen pictures of you out hiking, and in this part of the world, that's one of the perks that we all have.
yeah, yeah, walking and hiking is my favorite exercise. And while the parks were closed, it was getting us a little rough because I was getting really sick of walking around my neighborhood. So every once in a while, I'll just drive to a new neighborhood and walk around there. But I'm still trying to walk 3 to 5 miles a day or so. Um, but mainly, my list. I was on the road so much, or just gigging so much pre-pandemic, that my list of back burner ideas and projects and things I thought were cool ideas that I wanted to get to one day was a mile long. So I really just started kind of prioritizing that. Initially, partly out of fear, out of my loss of income, when I realized, I woke up one morning and most of my year had been canceled. Every tour, every trip. I'm supposed to be in Holland right now. It's
Wow.
like everything. And actually, that started in February because I was supposed to be in Asia before this really hit in North America, and that all got canceled first. And then this. So at first it was a little bit of a panic thing, but then I just got so wrapped up, and it was finding it so gratifying that I just kind of wholeheartedly poured my energy into it. Mainly the basseducation.com, and I also the first thing I did was film a 2-hour video companion to Right Hand Drive, which I've made. I have a couple things up there now, but movies.damianerskine.com has a handful of kind of on-demand videos for streaming or download that people could buy. Um,
Cool.
but really, mainly focusing on the website and creating content and trying to make it as good a site as I can for everybody, and making myself wholly available to everybody too, having them, encouraging them to send me questions and comments and clips of them playing for, a critical ear, whatever it is, trying to just really embrace the educational side of my life and be as available as I can to everybody. Just be a resource for people.
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to organize your time for sure. And I take it to heart the idea that it's okay to have some days that are less productive for
Yeah,
sure. That's a
it's
tough one,
crucial.
right?
It's a tough one. Yeah, we
Yeah.
feel especially when there's not as much money coming in, but the bills keep coming in. There's a tendency to feel like we just, if we're not hustling for something, we're just burning time. But I fully embraced the need to relax and quiet the mind when it's necessary, and take an entire weekend or an entire week and just read and hike and whatever it is that brings you joy, shifts the focus.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good note, I think, to wrap up on. Thank you for all of that today, Damien. It's been wonderful to get to hang with you again. And, hopefully next time we do this, we'll be right here at my place.
Yeah, man, it's been too long since we've gotten to hang in person, so I hope we can get up there soon.
Yeah, me too. Well, not too soon, but yeah, when things settle down, that'll be a good day when we're all back out on the road doing what we do.
Yeah, very much so.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you.